Everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Marc Hill. I'm a professor at Temple University, but I have the extraordinary honor to be hosting the series in July for the Center for Urban Education Summer Education Forum here at the University of Pittsburgh. I am very excited to be a part of a series of conversations about crisis pedagogies. Communities, education, and the public good. And every week, we will be talking about what it means to engage in forms of pedagogy at moments of crisis. We're not thinking about pedagogy in the technical sense of, just teaching and learning, but thinking about the broader way that educational workers, thinkers, intellectuals, activists, parents, students, organizers, policymakers, leaders can engage the world in such a way that we allow for new possibilities, new ways of being, new ways of thinking, new ways of reorganizing the world in ways that are more fair and humane and safe and just. The theme specifically this year is communities, education, and the public good. And so this month, we're really thinking very deeply about this question of community. What constitutes a community? How do we understand community? What does community look like? What can community look like? What communities should we look to as examples for what's possible? And how can our communities respectively be looked at as sites of possibility as well? And of course, education is central to the conversations we're having. But again, we're thinking about education in a very broad way. We're thinking about what happens in school. We're thinking about what happens in these institutions. We're thinking about the education of everyday life. We're thinking about public policy. We're thinking about pop culture. We're thinking about activism. We're thinking about organizing. And all of it is connected to this idea of the public good. At a moment where the public good is being compromised by private interests, it's very important for us to try to hold on to this idea of the public, to wrestle with different and sometimes competing notions of what constitutes the public, but ultimately to believe that once we invest in the very idea of the public being a good thing, not a burden, but a site of investment, a site of a resource, intellectually, culturally, politically, socially, that we can move toward the public good. And what better way to do that than to bring together people who are actively involved in these conversations? Last week, we had a wonderful series of conversations with students. And this week, we're having a equally wonderful conversation, I do expect, with parents and caregivers and other family-oriented people, as well as people who think about circles of support. So without any further ado, because I've done all my talking for the afternoon, I want to bring on the people who will help lead this conversation, help us have a wonderful conversation about a range of issues. The first person I want to introduce is Amber Thompson. Amber is a Black radical mother who resides in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. She's advocated for disenfranchised and underserved populations since she was a young girl. Working on behalf of underrepresented populations within the nonprofit and private sector, Amber saw an opportunity to increase equity throughout businesses and communities. I'll just ask all the panelists to mute just when they're not on for now. After completing her master's degree in organization development at Penn State, she founded a change management consulting company. As a principal consultant for Leaders of Change, she wants to use the knowledge she gained as a community activist and a project manager to help companies develop strategies to create equitable and sustainable business solutions. Amber Thompson, welcome. We're so glad to have you here. I want to bring in Angel Gober. Angel is Western PA organizing director at One PA. Angel started 15 years ago building a tenants union in public housing where she lived with her daughter. Since then, she has been a fearless community organizer. She's worked on housing, educational justice. She's been a winning campaign manager for local school board campaigns, and she's even co-authored policy to stop the school-to-prison pipeline.
Oh, no.
Angel envisions and strategically works toward a world resourced and beautiful for Black children. I love that. I'm going to say that again. Angel envisions and strategically works towards a world resourced and beautiful for Black children. She's dedicated to statewide and national coalitions to make change. Angel, welcome. Brittany Murray is a passionate Pittsburgh activist and organizer, having participated in Black Lives Matter and Trans Lives Matter protests and rallies, as well as leading community-oriented healing events over the years. Considered a movement auntie by some, she's a staunch anti-capitalist and a proud hood femme. Oh, I love y'all so already. All three of y'all love y'all. She is a member of the Allegheny County Black Activist Organizer Collective, which recently delivered a list of demands for police reform to the Pittsburgh mayor. She's also co-founder of Okra Ethics, a grassroots Black and Indigenous collaborative. She works on so much stuff. It's actually pretty dope. She served on the board of Sisters PGH, and she was part of the Black Brilliance community cohort. Brittany hails from a long lineage of union workers and carries that torch by being a member of the USW LGBTQ+ Advisory Committee and acting as LU 3657 treasurer, in addition to having served on the UFCW Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Board. Brittany, welcome. Lori Delale-O'Connor is in the building. Lori, is it Delale or Delale? Forgive me. It just crossed my mind. I'm sorry? Oh, it is Delale? Delale. Okay, forgive me. Lori Delale-O'Connor, PhD, is an assistant professor of education at the University of Pittsburgh Center for Urban Education. Her research focuses on examining the connections between families, communities, and education across spaces, with a particular focus on fostering equity and justice for children and youth in urbanized educational systems. Dr. Delale-O'Connor earned her PhD in sociology from Northwestern University. She also holds an MED in secondary education from Boston College, where she was a Donovan Urban Scholar and taught secondary social studies in Boston Public Schools. So she's a theorist, she's a researcher, and she was in them pedagogical streets. She walk it like she talk it. Her research has been published in AERJ, Teachers College Record, and Urban Education, among other outlets. She's also co-author of the 2019 book, These Kids Are Out of Control, Why We Must Reimagine Classroom Management for Equity, Sage Publications. Doctor, Professor, thank you. Welcome. We have Maria Searcy in the building. Maria is a dedicated community activist, a wife, a mother, a writer, a tutor, an artist, and an entrepreneur. She's employed by the PA Department of Education as a parent involvement in education consultant that provides training to parents, teachers, and administrators in school districts across the state. And she helps them increase parent involvement in the schools. With family and education as primary core values, Maria recently co-founded Searcy Consulting Group with her two daughters to empower African-American families in the areas of parent advocacy, college and career readiness, school governance, and entrepreneurship. A published author, she published a piece actually in the Western Journal of Black Studies, a very prestigious Black Studies journal, and 12-year member of the PA Title I State Parent Advisory Council. Mrs. Searcy was presented with the Racial Equity Community Empowerment National Award for her work in education and community advocacy. She's a member of the Equity Advisory Panel, PPS, a graduate of Pittsburgh Public Schools and Robert Morris University. I want to introduce, thank you, welcome, Maria. I want to introduce our last two panelists as well. Medina Jackson, MSW, is the director of the PRIDE program. PRIDE stands for Positive Racial Identity Development in Early Education. That's an initiative out of the University of Pittsburgh School of Ed's Office of Child Development. The mission is to help young Black children ages 3 to 8 understand race and embrace their heritage by sharing knowledge and skills and developing resources with the primary adults in their lives. The goal is to also to counter the impact of racism in America. With PRIDE, Medina oversees community and arts engagement strategies, including the popular PRIDE pop-up mini arts festivals. Also, Medina, artistically known as Medina, is also a spoken word and hip hop artist, writer, mama, community educator, and 2017 Pittsburgh 40 Under 40 honoree. So these people are, everybody on here is so multi-talented, does so many things. I'm grateful that y'all had so much time. Originally from South Berkeley, California, Medina moved to Pittsburgh in 2001 to obtain a master's degree in social work from the University of Pittsburgh and has been committed to this city ever since. And lastly, and certainly not least, and first let's give Medina that love. Yes, yes, yes. Last and certainly not least, let's bring in Windafire. He is a 16-year-old healing art. I love that.
17.
17. I don't want to get that wrong. 17-year-old healing artist who uses music, fashion, magic, and meditation. We got to talk about that magic. I need to learn. His first single, Alive with Pride, produced by Liz Berlin through Creative Life Support, had its debut as an opening act for Big Frida. Is it Big Frida?
Big Frida, yeah.
At People, the Big Frida?
Yeah, the Big Frida.
Oh, you big time. Okay. At People's Pride Pittsburgh in 2019. He's an active co-founder and co-collaborator with Rest doula Onika Rains on Black Dream Escape, a therapeutic practice that focuses on Black and Indigenous rest, sleep, and dreams. Yo, focusing on rest and sleep and dreams, that's pretty fresh. He's also an active member of Dreams of Hope and an intern with Youth Express. Welcome to all of you. There's so much going on in the world this week, this month, this season, this year. Like, this year has been upside down. And, you know, when we decided to have a series of conversations on crisis pedagogies, some of this was foreseeable. We're in the age of Trump, so crisis is sort of the order of the day. But there was something particularly urgent about this moment. What do you see? And I want anybody to jump in right now. What do you all see as some of the most urgent stuff you're wrestling with as parents, caregivers, students, etc.?
I'll speak on my behalf. I'm a mother to a 10-year-old, and one of the greatest things that I see being urged towards parents, or at least coming out of my own anxiety, is we really have no idea what direction we're moving in going forward in regards to our children, in regards to their care, their education. The situation is incredibly fluid. None of us really has an idea of what the fall is supposed to look like. And then, you know, we wake up each day and we read even more preposterous, this administration doesn't do anything to quell our frustration or anxiety. The assertions that are coming out of this administration are not only traumatic and triggering, but just do nothing for parents that may not have the necessary support systems or resources to really be able to navigate how they're supposed to get their children back to school, how they're supposed to advocate for their children's education. So the one thing I know right now, without a fraction of a doubt, that all of us feel is fear and uncertainty and anxiety. And there is nothing that has come, at least into my forefront, that has kind of stifled that. So that's where I'm at with it.
Can I actually pause there for a minute and jump in? Because I usually do a check-in. We family here. So, you know, and you feel free to answer what I already asked, but as you're talking, I would like all of you to sort of tell me, how are you feeling in this moment? What are you feeling, right? Because this isn't just an intellectual practice or political work. There's also a psychological and emotional and spiritual dimension to this. And so how are you feeling?
Rage.
We can start with Brittany. Yeah,
y'all.
Oh,
who else? No, rage is a great place to start.
Wait, Brittany, were you done? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you. Okay. Yes, I feel very exhausted. One Pennsylvania is a membership-based organization. We have a lot of folks that are directly impacted by all the issues, even before COVID. And so just having to deal with members who have been diagnosed with COVID, having to deal with folks that have lost their income and are struggling to make ends meet, and just trying to figure out organizationally how we can support and lift up our folks, and just like trying to raise money. And it's like, you know, we live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where there's a lot of like philanthropic dollars. And so like right now it's like, you know, I don't want to report out budgets to you. I can't like talk to people that are struggling about, you know, how we work on these very specific campaigns when people's like basic human needs are not being met. So like, give us cash for that. So, you know, it is just like since COVID hit, you know, as an organizer, I think that, you know, I already work 70 hours a week, but now that's like doubled somehow, just because we need to, you know, have rapid response to our people and make sure that we're keeping our community together.
Maria, yeah.
Yeah, so, you know, I'm in despair, and the COVID crisis hasn't made it any better. So I've been working as an advocate since my children were in school for over 15 years. and now they're college graduates. And I've been working on the equity advisory panel, looking at data, and I still see a widening achievement gap. So I'm fearful that because of what's going on, now with remote learning and just all the issues that the pandemic brings, that we're going to be looking at, I don't even know how to call it, we're going to be looking at a canyon, not a gap between Black and white students. And what is really, depressing to me is that we know that education is the key to a better future. And so, without kids getting basic skills, this is why, I don't see any more Black neighbors around me. Gentrification, we can't afford housing. Kids are in food crisis. There's just all kinds of basic needs that are not being met. And honestly, my family's doing well, but you can't celebrate that when the people around you are suffering. And so as an advocate, as someone who works tirelessly at the local and state level, understanding that education is a key, I am saddened, I think, like Brittany said, that our Black leaders in our educational systems are inept at their jobs. And so, but I still have faith. I still have faith, Marc, because I'm a woman of faith, and I do believe that God is sovereign. So that's the only thing that doesn't make me depressed. In despair, but not depressed.
Okay.
I like to say that I'm burdened.
Sorry. Burdened.
Yeah, I feel burdened. My daughter is 10 years old as well. She has epilepsy. She's also part of the Students with Exceptionality program. It's a learning disability program in Pittsburgh Public. And ever since she has entered this, outside of fighting for her health care for the first 3 years of her life, living in Children's Hospital and fighting for her health care, then she enters the public school system. And I've been fighting from day one. I'm tired. I am tired. She's going to 5th grade. I'm having the same conversations over and over again, talking to the same leaders who didn't learn from the last time. And then I'm burdened. I'm tired and I'm burdened, and this conversation has gone on for 5 years of her life. How long are we going to keep having it?
Wow.
So I wanted to jump in. I was told that I could, in response to the check-in and the question, I was told I could respond with a poem that really sums up kind of where I'm at. And I wrote this poem around the time that Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor was killed, as well as living in the pandemic. And I noticed that even though I'm spending more time with my child and I'm more present with him, really relishing watching him play and just being in his presence, and that's a good thing, I also knew and felt that that came from a space of fear and thinking about the uncertainty of the future, thinking about Black trauma and Black death, thinking about the social determinants of health that make COVID impact Black people more severely, right? So all of those things were just kind of swirling around me and inside me. And so I wrote this poem, and it's called "They Always Come, a Note to My Son." How do I prepare you for apocalypse? How do I prepare you for the inconspicuous, loud, cyclical doom of white supremacy's tentacles? How do I prepare my nervous system for what seems like the inevitable and inescapable trauma of, will I lose him someday, somewhere, somehow? See, they always come, the wonderless to the wanderers, to the free people, to those who are spacious, to those who hold themselves, to those shaped by expansive sky and ocean and dirt. It always comes. In a liberated moment, parasitic travelers leaving bones and dust in the wake of dawn and move on. I just want to keep you safe in a place that is trying to kill you a little bit every day, or by bullets exploding from guns, or by the relief of a needle from these troubles. It always comes to steal the light from your eyes, but see, it suffocates them. They can't hold it. I just want to shield you with my open heart, the sinking of your muscles, relaxed breath in my arms forever. It always comes, ushering the terrifying unknown, baiting us with bribes, trades, and fear of something worse, ready to reclaim an earth they do not own. They always come to dry up all the water, set fire to the soil, pollute the air with poison breath. They come in the night, they come in the day, they always come. Can I hold you one more time? One more kiss on your forehead, soothing hands through lion locks. Can I keep you in my sight? Can you stay with me while you spread your wings and sing your sweet shower songs? They always fucking come. Driving sticks into sacred ground, walking woundedness and death, teeth stained with someone else's blood when we are simply living. They do not know what true life, love, and liberation is, so they consume it with impunity and are never full. That's how I feel.
Woo. That's how you feel. Lori, it's your turn. Come
on now, how are you going to make me follow that?
I'm about to say, you better have a poem, an interpretive dance, something. That was fire.
I can't follow that fire. I mean, I think I just, in terms of everything that everyone else has said, I'm feeling all those things. And then maybe there's a part of me right now that feels very hopeful. I heard you say, Marc, as we were starting, like seeing communities, seeing families as a burden. That's what schools have long done, rather than seeing them as a resource, rather than centering them. And so to me, and I said this to a friend this morning, I have two daughters, an almost second grader and an almost eighth grader. And as schools are thinking about what they're doing and whether or not that's good for my family, or whether or not that's good for children, or whether or not that's good for anybody, one of the things that I think is most important is that they recognize they're on our turf now. So my children are always learning in my home, but right now you are talking to them in my home. And so I see a lot of possibility, because I think there's often in the research, there's often in rhetoric, there's often in school distributed materials that parents or caregivers or families are partners. But we don't see that. What we see instead is the expectation that caregivers, like the folks on here today, are expected to do what the schools want them to do and what educators want them to do. And there's a necessity for recentering. Again, whether or not it's being done, at the will of the school, it's now being done at the will of families. And so in the midst of I think, hopelessness, in the midst of anger, in the midst of just being tired of the varying advocacies, there's, to me, a moment that I'm like, well, there's possibility here, and maybe we can build on that possibility.
The idea of building on that possibility is exactly where I want to go today. And part of why I asked you all how you were feeling, in addition to genuinely just caring about you as people, is because I think part of the work we have to do is to not disconnect this intellectual work from the self, and understanding the toll that schools take on us, and the toll that it takes on us to do the work of resistance at all times. I don't ever want to romanticize that. There's pain in this work. There's struggle in this work. And hearing you all talk about feeling burdened and overwhelmed and rage, when soon you said I heard rage, I thought of Bell Hooks's book, Killing Rage, and sort of how she talked about that, and also what it meant for the guy sitting next to her on the airplane to see that in her notepad, and how he responded, because the world doesn't want to see that from us. But there's a reason why we do it. When we talk about schools, because I think that's an interesting place to start, the idea of how schools see family, how schools see caregivers, caregiving, how schools see all this stuff, I think is important. I want to start with you, Windafire, and don't think I didn't notice that you ain't tell me how you was feeling. So the first thing I need to know is how you're feeling, and then I want you to talk to me a little bit about sort of how do you think schools deal with family and families, however we think about it.
Well, first, I'm pretty frustrated at the world, pretty frustrated at what's going on, and I'm also really tired because, as someone who does a lot of rest work, when this whole crisis went on, when trauma was inflicted onto everyone, everybody has not really taken that much time to rest, has not taken that much time to heal. And so my work with Annika, we help people rest. And so we've just been getting busier and busier and busier. And I haven't been able to live our practice either too much, because we're really busy right now helping people so that they can heal and can rest. How I feel about how schools treat families is, I can really only talk from a place outside the system, since I'm home educated and I have been my whole life. But I feel like there's a great need for schools to more so go to the learner instead of telling the learner what to learn. I mean, there are some things that, you can't escape. Like there's math and whatnot, but a lot of things I feel can be taught in ways that are interesting to young people, such as, even with math and say geometry, if someone's really interested in sewing and that stuff, all fashion is geometry. That's something that my mom has always taught with me. My mom has always kind of lived by that thinking of that you should, if a learner wants to learn something, then they will go above and beyond to do that. And she learned that from a school that my sister went to when she was little, which is the Antioch School, which is in Yellow Springs, Ohio. And the Antioch School is a truly amazing school. It just lets the kids go and learn whatever they want together harmoniously. And so everybody's in there, not necessarily having a what's the word? Just a set curriculum. They're all learning together harmoniously. And I think that that's very beautiful. And I feel like schools should really strive to, I feel like most schools should really strive to do that.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. You said a few things that I think are really interesting. One, when I think about harmony, a few words came up in what Windafire just said. One is this idea of harmony. We don't all have to sing the exact same note, right? And so we can attend to difference and still see ourselves as part of a community that's working together. The other thing that Windafire said that I thought was really interesting is, being homeschooled, your parents were very responsive to your needs, right? Your mom said, look, my child learns like this, my child needs this, my child's goals are this. I'm going to listen both directly to you, but also listen to your behavior, listen to your actions, watch your interests, and then make school be responsive to you, right? So now many of us don't get the opportunity to do homeschooling. And so to some of the other panelists, I'm asking, how do we get school to be that responsive? Obviously, school doesn't have the resources to be a parent per se, but there's also a way that, especially when Black families send their kid to school, there's an expectation that we're putting a certain level of trust in the teacher to watch over them the way we would watch over them, right? To keep them safe, to keep them healthy. How good a job is school doing in responding to the needs of families, the needs of students? How much are they in harmony with families? Talk to me about what you're experiencing. Talk to me what you're thinking, y'all. I see heads shaking, so I'm gonna start with Maria and then go from there.
Okay, sorry.
You sure? Because Angel had her hand up, but.
Oh, okay. I can't see everybody. I can't see. I gotta I'm scrolling, so I didn't see you, Angel. Go ahead.
Go to Angel and then come to me. Thanks.
Okay, that worked for me.
So I'm going to start with money, because I know, Mr. Hill, you did mention about limited resources. So if we're thinking about school budgets and, statewide budgets, Pennsylvania has had severe, deep cuts to education over many, many years, from the $1 billion Corbett cuts in Philadelphia too.
Oh yeah.
So, and then you have this argument, well, how much does it actually cost to educate a kid? But the conversation should be, how much does it cost to educate a kid who is dealing with trauma, whose family's in poverty, who don't have access to basic human needs? Like, that's the conversation we need to have. And, part of the work that we do at 1PA is like, actually, instead of over criminalizing these babies and pushing them out away from their education, why don't we divest some of that public safety money, right, that we use to criminalize students, to arrest young Black girls, and invest that into actual resources? It wouldn't take much to, have people from the community be climate coordinators. Grandmas, aunties that are from the neighborhood that know these kids could easily, old Black mamas have a way of de-escalation, right? So like, if there's a way that we can actually have peacekeepers and people to build relationships, build these relationships and maintain these relationships, and have somebody that will advocate for our kids. Because kids in the school building should be able to have that one person that they can go to, which is not a school police officer. Because if that conversation or that power dynamic changes, then that police officer has the authority to arrest or give citations to that student. But somebody that is not in a policing state to advocate for a child when there's a problem or there's a conflict between a child and an educator. So I think we really need to have a hard conversation about how we're spending our money, and how, we always need to have more money. I mean, we have the lowest school tax than anywhere else in Allegheny County for Pittsburgh public schools. But like, if you're going to keep telling us you're not going to give us any more money, how about we start taking some of that money away from the over-criminalization of our students?
Makes sense. Yeah, Maria.
So I've been doing the work of parent involvement and parent engagement for a long time. So I know that schools are required by the state to have a family engagement policy. So policies and practices shape a family structure with the school. For example, a homework policy and homework practice will connect the home and school. But within a school, like within 2 schools in my district, Perry and Martin Luther King, I stood outside both of those schools, and the kids are not assigned homework. And then we want to complain that parents don't come in. If I'm watching my child do homework and she can't do it, then I'm going to call the teacher. And if the teacher don't get help, I'm going to call the administrator. But shit, if she's not doing homework, what's the sense in calling the school? So and then, we have, like, I helped establish an equity policy. So the equity policy governs how that equity is supposed to be embedded in different practices in the school and in the system. But, when you look at, no one knows about the equity policy. We establish codes of conduct and there's no training. So kids don't know that if they wear flip-flops to school, that they can get suspended. And, just like Angel said, funding is an issue. I work at the state. We have huge Title I budgets that come from the state, monies that are used for parent engagement, but parents don't know that. So, the thing is, the bottom line is that parent involvement is not high on our priority list. On the district's priority list. I don't even know if there's an office that really spearheads parent engagement anymore. I've used to be involved in that, but I don't even know if that's up and running, because we have lost so many key employees. We are a district that's operating without a deputy superintendent. And, when you talk about policies, if you look at the district's strategic plan, one of the objectives in way that Dr. Hamlin said he's going to eliminate racial disparities is with recruiting and retaining high performance by recruiting individuals that can do the job. But when you look at the outflux of Black principals and administrators in his administration, then you ask, like, how could this be done? If we don't have a deputy, and how are we going to do remote learning if we don't have a chief of technology? And the person who is spearheading that is trying to, run a very important department, DREA, data research, evaluation, and assessment. Like, you can't have one person spearheading 2 important jobs that are directly linked to student achievement. So, just to sum it up, if parents were valued for our strengths, our values and our beliefs, and if we were brought to the table where we could share power and really be involved as first teachers in our children's in decisions that really affect our children, then you would see a difference in achievement, because we know what we're doing. I do. I could fix, honestly, I'm not kidding you. I got solutions to 2 schools. And may I say that the 2 schools in my neighborhood that are most problematic, Perry and Martin Luther King, are currently without principals. That consistent turnover is so unresponsive to the needs of families. So I'm done. I'm gonna let somebody else talk.
No, this is great.
I just want to bring up that we're not talking about this system itself. This system does not allow for parent engagement, especially in the current school district that we're the public school, Pittsburgh Public. When you're working with the top-down, a hierarchical structure with so much bureaucracy between the top and the school, where do you expect parents to fit in whenever decisions have to be made through several layers of people who aren't working in the schools, who sit on Belfield and do not come into the schools? Again, we are not allowed to be part of this system. We need to throw it away and start over again.
I think to Amber's point. Oh, go ahead, Brittany.
Thank you, Lori. We're probably going to make comparable points here in a second, because what Amber just said it all. Because when I think about these things, there's a discussion going on, especially within national organizing and activist communities right now, surrounding what it means to actually talk about these systems and these institutions, and how they are literally just collaborations of individual people that decide to come together underneath an ideology or underneath a set of principles or underneath, all of these different assertions. And the thing that really drew me in when we started having these conversations is, how are the school districts even created? How are they generated? What are the PA state laws? What are the codes? Where are we seeing this constant creation of vacuums, of bottlenecks, of funding, of bureaucracy, of hierarchies, of administrations? And what it all comes down to is, like Amber said, the system is just broken. It doesn't work. It doesn't function. Whatever best intentions existed, doesn't affect the actual impact, because at the end of the day, the impact is us having these conversations that, sometimes come off frustrating for advocates, because they do feel cyclical. You feel like you'll be having this conversation 5 years from now, and then 10 years from now, and then 20 years from now, you'll still be talking about the same stuff. I don't know if I can swear, but the same stuff. So it's like, when it comes down to like the actual creation of these institutions within our municipalities, within our legislatures, is it working? How we erect these institutions, is it working? How they receive their funding, is it working? Even when you get to higher learning, universities, especially within the state of Pennsylvania, I don't know how it functions everywhere else, but especially within the state of Pennsylvania, rely on these school districts to give them students. But where is their common investment within the community? You know what I mean? It's just like, how does all of this stuff seem to funnel away from students, from parents, even from teachers to a degree, and everyone else seems to come out good on it, except for the folks that we most rely on. And that for me is a major issue that I know that other folks can definitely speak to, but it's something that I've been digging into now over the last probably like 2 years. And I want to hear Maria's solutions, because I have some, but I bet you hers are better. I'm gonna let somebody else speak on it though.
I just wanted to say, so you're right, Brittany, that's in terms of what I was gonna say, but I think even deeper than that, by design, historically, schools were meant to deculturize students, right? That was one of their goals. And so we're placing different goals, depending on where you live and what community, on schools that were never the goals that they were founded with. And so now we're acting as though they can do something different. It's the same, I think, to Angel's point before about like criminalizing schools. You've got police, you've got security, but then we're going to act like somehow these folks will care for the babies. They're not, that's not what they're there for. And similarly, the school's goals are not to be in partnership or to be in community. In some ways, they are creating their own communities that are meant to create a certain kind of young person, right? And we know that that is it's typically normed along upper class, white ways of being, and that anybody who doesn't fall in line with that, including families, is going to be punished. And so, I think we're putting different goals and saying, oh, schools as they exist can be a place of liberation. And there's no reason we should expect that, because by design, that's not what they do.
So I think in terms of just parents and caregivers and kind of that interface with us and with students and so I think that there's an assumption that parents don't care about their children's education, and that our commitment to our child's education is dependent on whether we are physically present in the building to show up for a school function or a meeting or not, right? So there's a difference between parent involvement and parent engagement. Parent involvement is all the stuff that we do to prepare our child for education outside of the school building. So that is us waking our children up. That's doing our best to, make sure that they have a healthy meal in the morning. That's homework help. That's doing the best that we can with what we have, right? So that's parent involvement. And then parent engagement is more of the school, the caregiver kind of interface, being a part of the PTA, showing up for school functions and so forth. So, caregivers and our children, we are the customer, and the product offered needs to be reflective of the needs and desires of the customer and organized in collaboration with the customer. And to everybody's point, I also know that historically our current education system was not designed for us and our children in mind, right? So a barometer for me, a personal barometer for me in regards to my child's education is very simple. Do you like school? Do you find a sense of joy and excitement with the school that you're going to? My child is 10 and he's going to the 5th grade right now. In 1st grade, he hated school. And when I say hated school, I mean every single day out of the 180-day school year, we had to argue about him going to school, right? So that is a barometer for me telling me that you are not in the right place. Your spirit is being broken in this space, and we got to make another decision. So we made another decision, right? So that's a barometer. It's a very simple barometer. Does your child like school? And that's a barometer for educators, for superintendents, for principals, all that. Are the children you are educating finding something meaningful in the space that you are holding and facilitating, right? And so just a little bit of like my own background. I'm from Berkeley, California. I went to Berkeley High School, 10th to 12th grade. And that happened to be the most empowering experience of my life, or one of the most empowering experiences of my life, right? At Berkeley High School, we had an Africana Studies department. We were the only school in the country that had that, right? We had classes like Black psychology, Black relationships, Black economics, a performing arts class, Afro-Haitian dance class, right? And we found, at our school, we had really dope Black educators, right? And we know that now 83% of the teaching force is white. And one educator in particular, Hadari Davis, he was masterful in educing. The root word of education is to educe, which means to bring out that which is already present. And that can happen anywhere. But he was able to connect with us. He really knew his content. He happened to be an MC, started a hip hop after school program, right? And so he saw in me what I didn't see in myself. I was a very quiet student. I'm still very quiet in my core and in my center. And I took his Black psychology class. I got 98% on the final exam. I needed to proctor in the next semester for his class to get some credits. I asked him. He said, no, you're not going to proctor in my class. You're going to teach my class. And I was like, what? Right? But that experience really planted the seed for student voice and the need for students to be in charge of what it is that they are learning, and that everyone else needs to take notes from students about their experience. And to this day, all that I learn at Berkeley High School regarding racial and cultural identity, equity, justice. I was politicized. I started organizing student forums against racism, white supremacy, sexism happening in the schools, right? So all that I got there in that educational space, you can see it in the work that I do today. So when we center students and their needs, as well as providing equitable experiences, justice-filled experiences, joy-filled experiences, focusing on racial and cultural identity as well, it's the gift that keeps on giving.
I just wanted to also add that I feel like a big problem that in the schools is that I feel like we need to stop looking at children as products that are either cheaply, poorly manufactured knockoffs or high-end luxury goods. The system is designed to treat us as bad knockoffs. In a recent article titled, "Is Unschooling the Way to Decolonize Education?" Valerie Van de Pan wrote, "Systematic racism and colonialism is baked into the standard curriculum, and the biases of majority white administrated schools are on display, whether those biases are unconsciously supported by district-approved textbooks or enshrined in law." I have that written down because I just wanted to put that up because that's a great article.
That's an important, super important addition, and I think so. Let me connect a few dots here to push a little bit. Part of what I'm hearing from you all is that school is not just that school is a system that's dysfunctional that can be tightened up or reformed. You're saying that the system itself is dysfunctional, right? That at its core, it's not created to yield the kind of experiences and outcomes we want. And there's another piece to this that I'm thinking about, which is, when you say, do you like going to school, right? And the child says no. And the child still has to go to school, right? And they graduate from school and they become parents. What is their relationship to school now? Right, and those institutions, right? To use Windafire's language, what happens when you feel like you've been treated like the knockoff, right? How do you feel when you feel like school hasn't done you well? And so when we think about the relationship between parents, caregivers, and school, how do your own experiences with school and schooling shape how you interact with school and how we should understand school? Because as a high school teacher, I taught at a neighborhood high school in Philadelphia. And so many students I had when I'm teaching 9th grade or 14, 15, and their parents had been there 18 years prior. And the older you get, the faster 18 years goes. And so, they remember being in the same building. They remember walking in that same school. Sometimes they remembered the same teachers. Sometimes they had the same teachers. And they knew how school made them feel, how that school made them feel. And so they never felt like they were part of the equation, right? Even I hear you all using the language, some of you using the language of sort of the consumer, and that's an interesting thing, right? Because there's the consumer model, there's the family model, there's different ways to think about what our relationship could be to this institution. And even if I feel like a consumer, if I feel like a consumer in a restaurant that doesn't really want me there, or a store that doesn't really want me there, that's very different, right? Than feeling like a high-end, again, to use Windafire's language, to feel like a high-end customer. So how does our history with school, how do parents' relationships with school get taken up by school or ignored by school? And what does that mean?
So let me say this, okay? So the school designs models that I don't think that they have expectations for children that adults couldn't even navigate. So for example, I wrote some things down here. So my daughters didn't like school. I wanted to, just piggyback off of what Medina said. They were good students, but their school day began at 5:30 a.m. So because of the logistics of Pittsburgh, a lot of kids are, when transportation was cut, and they designed the 6 to 12 schools and tried to stagger school bells. That caused the central office to enact early start time. So kids are getting up and starting their day at 5:30 a.m. Lord. So they have sleep deprivation, hazardous routes, walking down dark city steps, going into downtown, getting ridiculed by police and white business owners that don't want them down there, standing on overcrowded buses on a 45-minute commute across town to get a better education. waiting outside to go through metal detectors and encounter contentious security guards that don't have no training to be in the jobs they're in. They eat high sugar foods in the morning. Kids are eating honey buns and Trix cereal and Trix yogurt in the morning. They have arbitrary class scheduling. So some of them encounter a calculus class. For God's sake, my daughter's first period was calculus 2, and I had nothing to do with her scheduling. The restrooms are locked. Teachers are ill prepared. The homerooms are unruly. In the wintertime, they're 98 degrees. You wonder why our taxes are so high, school taxes. So understand this. Kids are set up in the early morning for an extended school day that they just can't navigate. You know, so of course, I mean, before the school day even begins. And let me just say this real quick. So Angel knows this because we worked on this together. You know, their schools, the school in my neighborhood, Martin Luther King, is a community school model. Okay. So when they talk about, you know, trying to have behavior models in there, positive behavior intervention and supports, PBIS. That's in our strategic plan. I wish people would read it and hold Dr. Hamlet accountable for the contents of his strategic plan that is not over until 2022. So PBIS, let me tell you what PBIS looks like in Martin Luther King real quick. It's a leveling system, and teachers arbitrarily, subjectively assign points to children. Okay, the highest you can be is the color burgundy, and the lowest you can be is the color purple. You can't get no lower than purple. And when you are purple, they take privileges away from you, bad privileges. Okay, and then you get in purple lunch. So if you're in purple lunch in a community school, you get segregated from other kids, and you are in purple lunch with petulant purple pupils. Okay,
I like that alliteration now.
Yeah, all right. So how does that build community, and how is that positive PBIS, and how does that build community? It doesn't. It disengages parents. It disengages. I was pissed off because it was plastered on the front of the school. So understand this, Marc. That's what shapes your relationship with schools. You know, all of that. That's what I'm done.
I don't want to change the subject. I just want to add another layer to this, so that we can have a concrete example as we continue to talk through this issue, and that is the question of COVID. When the COVID-19 pandemic broke out, you all are in Pittsburgh, I'm in Philadelphia, excuse me, so we're in the same state, and right in the middle of March, things shut down. Public schools were closed here, and suddenly, I heard I can't remember if it was Maria or Brittany who said, I think it was Maria who talked about this idea of parents being the first teachers. And so now the first teachers are, you know, back home again with these kids. And they also have to work, and they also have to navigate other things, right? Questions about childcare emerge. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff happening, and people are terrified that they're going to die. How do you think schools navigated or managed this whole COVID pandemic in relationship to parents, right? Because I think this is a concrete kind of case study of what we're talking about, of how schools engage parents, how they treat parents, how they look to parents, what they ask from parents. And I got to tell you, I saw yesterday Betsy DeVos say that teachers, yesterday she said that teachers basically gave up and didn't do anything, and schools and teachers gave up and didn't do anything during COVID-19. And I want to flip my desk over, because there's a way that I think people too high up don't understand what's happening on the ground and all the work that teachers and students and parents are doing. The question though is, are we doing it in ways that benefit each other? Specifically, is the school doing this? Did they manage the COVID crisis in a way that was collaborative with parents? Why or why not? Brittany, let me start with you.
So my answer to that would be no. My daughter's school did not come forth with collaborative effort. There was a lot of apologizing. There was a lot of conversation surrounding how the circumstances were fluid. There was a lot of, it felt like there was like a lot of placation mostly, but there was no, you know, how do you feel we can best move forward to make the end of the school year as good as it can be for our students. And also, for our staff and for our schools as a whole. There was none of that. I will say that the school itself, the district itself dropped the ball. The teachers stepped up in insurmountable ways. It was almost like they were unshackled. There was like a level of not only curiosity, but also creativeness that came out of these circumstances. And also their anxiety started coming to the forefront in the fact that they were not with their students on a daily basis. Like their routines were completely just swept out from underneath their feet. So we all know what it means for our behaviors to become adapted out of our routines and out of our schedules, right? So they are now at home every day with more time than they've probably had available to them in recent years or throughout their entire education career to think about how to address these barriers for their students. And my daughter's teachers, especially her home room teacher, because that is their setup. They have multiple teachers. They have like a specific homeroom teacher, generated an entire website for her students and kind of forced and corralled the other teachers to like come on board with her to better think about how they can move forward in their engagement and their teaching and how it would be most beneficial to the students. So I really applaud her for that. Like and even still in that, that gave me kind of like a bit of reprieve, but simultaneously there still was no collaboration there. Even for as miraculous as that was for me as somebody that still had to maintain work and also had this child at home, and I'm looking at her and she's looking at me and she's like, wait, you actually have a job? And I'm like, yeah, girl, like this is how this works. It still wasn't collaborative. There were still some aspects of her education where I felt like I wish I could have vocalized some things to them. There would have been less trial and error had there been more communication between us. But I say that a lot of the burden, especially underneath COVID, fell to the individual teachers. It landed completely squarely on top of them and flattened them, frankly.
Angel and Medina.
Yeah, so I think the COVID happened, and that was really hard. I also know that the Pennsylvania Department of Education really didn't offer much guidance to local school districts. So I know that the school district had to figure it out pretty quickly with limited resources. I think there is a lot of feedback on, how that process can be better. So one of the things that we participated in during remote learning is making sure that students were held harmless from, grading policies. So, we had to fight a little bit with the school district and the school board to say that, listen, kids already had barriers to learning prior to COVID. So if we are transitioning into full remote learning where families don't have Wi-Fi or computers or devices at home and they're not able to participate, you're not going to fail them because of that. So we actually won a really good grading policy, which I think is, I would have given all the kids an A, but who am I, right? So for the third and fourth report period, kids got a 70% whether you participated or not. Gotcha. And so that was really important to our parents, just because we know that, and then some of the systems that they use, all of our parents don't know how to use computers, so they can't sit down, with their kids to show them how to, maneuver Microsoft Teams or Zoom or Google or whatever folks are using. So that was one of the things that we fought for to make sure that kids are not, going to be penalized for COVID in this pandemic. And then the second thing, because I think the district did stumble quite a bit in the transition, and just to play devil's advocate, it was a matter of weeks and months, it was a month that you have to move a whole system pretty quickly. So we actually were a part of planning a all-in community led process with the district and the teachers union for what will it look like when we reopen in the fall, if we can reopen, which involved community members, parents, teachers, educators, school administration, broken down into over 20-something subcommittees from, safety to safety equipment to will we have, Kids go Mondays and Tuesdays, some will go Wednesdays and Thursdays, some will go Fridays. You know, what type of infrastructure do we have? Can we open up churches so that kids in that community could go and get their education? So there's a whole series of work that went into a 6-week plan, because we knew that it's such a, and the thing about it is, like, we can beat up on the district all we want, but like, that's a really hard job and you need everyone's input. And in my experience, when teachers, administrators, community members, parents, and youth work together, the plan seems to work better as something that we can adopt instead of a top-down process.
And that's part of what's interesting, right? Is that it is a hard job, and ignoring parents or not taking seriously the needs of parents actually makes the job harder. We're actually fighting against ourselves, to your point. You know, it's like we have 2 weeks to put together a strategy that no one could see coming. No one saw a global pandemic coming. And it's like, let's figure something out. Who should we talk to? Not the parents. You know, it seems like such an interesting sort of counterintuitive response, Medina. Yeah.
And just to add, just like one more thing to add to that. So we had 27 parents involved in that process. So we always fight our way in. We don't necessarily wait for them to tell us what the plan is. You know, our members are like really confident and strong and saying, oh, no, we're going to take over this meeting, honey, because these are the things that we need to talk about and that are important to our kids. So I think in the next week, there will be a Facebook Live kind of unveiling of some of the recommendations that came out of these subcommittee working groups.
Yeah, for my son's school, I would say that they actually did a really good job in surveying and collaborating with parents to make sure that the plan over the quarantine made sense. So it started out with them sending distance learning plans, right, that were optional, because my thing was, look, I have a job plus multiple projects. I'm cooking the food, right? How am I going to do this distance learning plan thing? So make it optional. That was at first. And then they did move on to mandatory distance learning plans. However, they consistently, we had to do like weekly surveys to talk about our experience. We were able to share any recommendations. And I know I did. I was emailing the principal, I was emailing his teachers, and they were very responsive.
What do they say? Help me understand, Medina. What do they say when you say to somebody, look, I understand that education has to take place, teaching and learning has to happen, but I have a whole job in life, and this is sort of the function of school, and now I understand we're in a crisis. But I don't have the bandwidth or the resources to do this. How you said school was helpful. What did they say? What did they do?
Well, they were helpful first in listening and trying to respond in a way that was understanding. So their language was understanding, because also, look, these teachers are going through the same thing, right? You have teachers who have multiple school-age children. So they're trying to facilitate their children's distance learning plans, as well as create distance learning plans for the students in their schools. So I know that this was not easy for teachers. They listened and they improved upon the plans, right? So I wasn't really feeling having to do a plan, but I was just like, okay, we'll try. And so the first versions of the distance learning plans, it was just like, it was a little confusing. I was just like, this is too much, outline what is required and then what is optional. Make that clear, because we're only going to do the mandatory stuff. And I was very clear about that. And then I saw,
Amen.
And that's it, in that order. And so I did see a change in the distance learning plans where it was labeled required, mandatory, independent work, and then optional work. And they just continued to improve along the way. They also had days where it was, the school, it was supposed to take around a couple of hours to get all of the work done, but then that's also very dependent upon your child and their disposition. So, we had to kind of find our rhythm, and I really had to, it was an experience for me in really seeing what my son needed, right, and responding to that. So at first I had to be like very present with him through the duration of him completing all of his work, like by his side, walking him through everything. But over time, I saw that he became more comfortable with doing the work on his own. He became more independent doing the work on his own, and I was able to kind of do other things. So I saw and realized that when we kind of are more flexible with our children, and we kind of leave them, support them, but allow them to facilitate their own learning or have a larger voice in their own learning, they will create a rhythm for themselves that worked for them. So though it was challenging, the first week of that whole distance learning plan, I call that hell week. It was hell week, but we did end up in a place where I saw some growth. And because his school has a specific focus on social and emotional learning, connectivity, and community, they recognized that the most important thing beyond the academic work was the ability for students to connect with their teachers. They checked in with us. They asked us if we were okay and how were we doing. And they created multiple spaces for children to be able to interact with each other via Zoom if you had the technology and the access and were able to navigate all of those things.
I want to put a pin on those days.
No, I have to, before you pin it, I have to jump in because I think.
I want you to go in. That's why I'm pinning it.
Okay, good.
Oh, yeah.
What I think we need to discuss is how special education stopped. Everyone's talking about how their children received school plans. My daughter was not educated for over 2 months. And whenever we're talking about centering children, you need to center the most marginalized if you plan on making any movement forward. You cannot just center Black children. You could just not center children with it's different needs. You need to center the most marginalized group, and that is children with special needs and disabilities. At the end of the day, these folks not only quit, they did not even go back to the plan that they put in place before COVID. And we're going on July 9th. My daughter's extended school year does not start till next Monday. When I tell you that I had to fight, I am screaming, I am fighting, I am calling everyone and their mother. I am asking for every administrator on my daughter weekly for 5 weeks to get her in a different extended school year program because I asked for it last school year because she is not retaining any information over the summer. They told me that I'm going to take what they want in their own ways. They did not come prepared for any of those meetings. They think, and I say think, I have a master's degree in organization development. You don't think I know how to make a plan? You don't think I know how to measure? And before we went to this, I built with my school team my daughter's special needs and education plan. So do not come to me and tell me that because you're going to sit here in front of a screen that this is any different than what happened over the last summer and what happened in school year. So I want to make sure that anyone on this call knows that everyone is talking about their children still receiving education. My daughter is still not being educated, and it's July 9th. That's the end of it.
No, that's a super important point. I don't want to lose that. Let's stay there for a second. Let me bring Lori in, and then we can push down on that. And then Windafire, I want to bring you back in because I need your brilliance on this. Lori, schools are structured to deal with mass amounts of education. They see lots of people. And when people are of the same sort, we've kind of figured it out. But when our idea of what the same sort is a white male student, if it's a middle class student, if it's a cisgendered student, then anybody who falls outside of that template gets marginalized. Another population that gets marginalized, of course, we can talk about people who have IEPs, just as another example. So there are all these different populations that that school doesn't necessarily do a great job of serving all the time unless we're very intentional about it. How did the COVID-19 crisis sort of exacerbate that? Because I'm hearing Amber's story, and I suspect that some of those challenges would be there in school, right? It wasn't like school was doing a perfect job for Amber before COVID-19. And then COVID-19 comes and she's saying, my child's not even getting an education. So how does COVID-19 for me in many ways was a spotlighted stuff that was already there. It didn't necessarily create new problems in every instance. Sometimes it spotlighted the problems that were already there, and COVID just becomes like almost a scapegoat for a more fundamental structural problem, right? In the way that schools fail us. Can you help me think through that a little bit? And then Amber,
No, and I was going to say, and I think that from what we've heard from everybody, right? Amber and I have had the chance to talk about it. Amber wrote a beautiful first-person essay for Public Source about her experience. It was, gorgeous. And I think a lot of what we're hearing, even the positive aspects, right, I think tie back to some of what Angel was pointing to about funding, right? When I think about the districts in the area or across the state that were able to mobilize quickly, they're the same districts that are able to do all of those things because they have resources and have been able to do this. I mean, you would see if you looked at sort of the patterns of, and you know, I don't believe it's the way we should be evaluating anything in terms of thinking about testing, but if you looked across the districts that are, you know, high flyers on our statewide testing, I would bet that that aligns pretty well with how quickly they were able to roll out plans, the ways they were able to get devices and other things to the students in their communities, or, you know, also independent schools and private schools, because they're working with different systems that are already functioning. And so, I mean, I think to the point that everybody has made, we're just seeing that exacerbated because this is what the schools have already been doing. And I think another point that ties in really importantly with that I don't know if our audience folks can see the chat, but the chat is really active, and I think a lot of important points are coming up.
It's gems coming out in this chat.
I know, right? But one of the things that I thought was the most important that comes across, and, you know, and Amber said, I'm sorry for yelling, and no, I think you need to be yelling, because to me, what everybody is saying is, no matter what kind of district you're in, everybody is having to fight as a caregiver, right? Whether that be a parent or a community carer, to be to be included, to have these ideas brought to the forefront, you know. And for some folks, you know, like Angel talked about, the folks that are like, oh no, I'm getting a seat at the table, but not everybody has that capacity to advocate. Not everybody knows the channels. And I think that's by design, right? That these are difficult to navigate because it's harder to have to contend with all of us, right? As families, as parents coming in and saying, no, this is what my child not only needs, but deserves, just by virtue of the education system. And, you know, I think Maria made the point in the chat, it shouldn't have to be an argument. It shouldn't have to be, do we know how to fight? Do we have the capital, whether that be social, whether that be financial, to advocate for the young people we care about, but that's already built in. And we see, again, the same way it lines up pre-COVID, we're seeing sort of in this during period that the families and the districts where folks have the resources to advocate, their voices, they don't even need to physically be at a table, right? Because none of us can be anywhere right now, but their opinions and their desires are already being encompassed by their districts, by their children's school, because they were sort of baked in from the onset. And the students and families who were the most marginalized from the onset continue to have those experiences. But now now we're talking, you know, I guess we've always been talking life or death, but we're talking about it in a different way because students are now, you know, are they going to be exposed to, you know, to potentially to COVID because they're going to be brought back in a way that really doesn't take their well-being into account or their family's well-being into account. And so, I mean, I think everybody here captured it. It's that need for constant advocacy that I think encompasses some of the exhaustion folks were talking about at the beginning, but that really, it doesn't look any different. It just feels more urgent right now.
That urgency is what prompted some of you, many of you, almost all of you, to identify as activists or organizers or both, you know. I guess I want to start with you, Windafire. What made you want to be active? What made you want to start doing work? What got you going? What issues matter to you?
Well, social justice is a family value. My family very much so believes in being the change that we see in the world. So my great-great-grandmothers, my grandmothers, my mom, my dad, everybody, they've come me here to, or they've they've raised me in a way so that I can be free. And that's what I want for the world. I want everybody to be free in body, in mind, in spirit, to not be afraid of what people are going to say or act on what they're going to say. Because people will always do that. The problems that are really important to me is, I don't know, I don't really feel like it's good to, I mean,
Can I ask you about one thing in particular? Because one of the things that I thought was pretty neat is, again, your idea of thinking about therapeutic practice and thinking about issues of rest and sleep and dreams. Because sometimes we separate that. Like you talk social justice, and that's cool. And then we say, okay, well, we do social justice over here, and then I worry about self-care over there. I worry about rest over there. I worry about, and what I want us to begin to think about is how those two things are connected. And that even the idea of being able to rest, the idea of being able to engage in therapeutic practice in many ways, it's something we all need, but not all of us are taught we deserve. And all of us don't think we have access to. And all of us, don't have it availed to us. And so part of what I think is neat that you're doing is that you're doing that. And you're also doing music, fashion, and you're focusing on this big picture question of healing. As an artist, you heal. As in all these ways you heal. Why is healing important to you?
Why is healing important to me? That's a really good question.
Thank you.
Healing. I hate to see people hurt. I hate to see people hurting. There's so much injury in the world, and not just physical injury. There's just so much injury and so much famine among everybody. Like you said, people don't usually equate social justice with resting or anything. I feel that really one of the best revolutions is living your best life, being unapologetically you, and doing what you need to do to heal. Healing is very important to me because
Oh, I mean, I think you're getting somewhere. I mean, one of the things, there's a woman, Esther Armab, who has a series called Emotional Justice. And one of the things she talks about is this idea of untreated trauma and how so many of us navigate the world with untreated trauma. And some of that untreated trauma is personal stuff that happens with your family, stuff that happens in your life, stuff that happens in relationships, all kind of stuff that's somewhat unique to our own individual experiences. But then there's a way structurally that we have untreated trauma. That's why I talked about these schools, right? Because what's going to happen is Amber's child may, in 20 years, will have a very particular relationship to this moment of 2020 and what it meant, right? And that's a certain kind of trauma. Those of us who go to schools that are insecure, that's a certain kind of trauma. Unsafe trauma. Many parents have used schools as places for food, for childcare, etc. And then suddenly COVID comes and all that's upside down. That's its own kind of trauma. Some of us walk into school buildings where we get searched and padded and surveilled by cameras and all of these things. And the whole kind of criminalizing ritual that we see in school every day is its own kind of trauma. Some of us leave neighborhoods where our friends are getting killed, right? That's trauma. And so all of that trauma can go untreated if we don't address it. And so part of what I think, Windafire, you're helping us to think about is the urgency, the need for that as part of radical practice, not in addition to radical practice, but as radical practice. Because in a world that wants to see Black folk and brown folk and trans folk and queer folk dead, surviving and engaging in self-care, and as you said, living your best life is its own kind of resistance. And so I never want to understate or undersell that. Many of you enter this world as activists, as organizers. What made you do that, right? Like Angel, what made you decide, I need to think about these issues and take them up in ways that are bigger than just myself?
No question for me?
Yeah, I'm gonna start with you, Angel. I'm gonna go to everybody on this one.
So, my daughter recently graduated from Pittsburgh, Obama, and like Amber and many other parents, you do have to fight to get your child educated. When it comes to school push out, when it comes to childlike behavior, when it comes to white supremacy and racism that is ingrained in our structures of education, when it comes to, zero tolerance policies, so I can totally commiserate with parents that, you know, just have to show up and fight. And there's a lot of parents that can't and don't. And so that those kids kind of just are pushed away or thrown out, right? So I think just ongoing, you know, some of the work that we do, and that's, I think, Lori, you had mentioned that, you know, every parent can't be present, which is right. So, you know, what we try and do is, you know, have workshops on how to even have an IEP meeting, how to even fight for services for your student. Because a lot of times, like, that's an intimidating space to walk into with a counselor or a teacher, if that's even who's present in the meeting, and then having to say, well, we can give you this is what we have to offer, but you know that that's not right for your child. So a lot of times just educating people on how to conduct that meeting gives people more of a confidence to be able to advocate for their kid. And so we're trying to build our base. You know, we have a small group of parents. You know, we do door knocking. You know, we show up at schools and pass out flyers and try and get parents engaged. But then COVID happened, so it's even more impossible to try and reach some of the parents that we would want to help support through trying to maneuver this really huge, ginormous educational system. So I'm not sure if that was a question you answered, but that's what was on my heart to talk about.
Then that's the answer.
Yeah. So.
Who else? Maria. Now, Maria, you out there in the world. You also write. You know, in fact, your piece in the journal, Western Journal of Black Studies, from 2017, I believe, was about this part of how you sort of take on this sort of advocacy activist role as a parent, and sort of what you have to navigate. So yeah, help us think about that.
Yeah, I think stories are one of the best ways to get our point across and even to advocate. And so, actually, my activism was encouraged by Black women who worked for the Pittsburgh public school system. But I can tell you a story about exactly how my activism was prompted. So in 2004, I had a client. I did her hair. Her name was Dr. Faye Wilson. She was the dean of Arsenal School. And she told me, she said, Maria, when you enroll your two daughters into Phillips Elementary School on the south side, I live on the north side of Pittsburgh. So south side is a very dissimilar neighborhood. She said, make sure that you join the Pittsburgh School Community Council, which is a very, you know, as a parent group. And she said, and make sure you attend those meetings with your husband as a united front. So she was concerned about the disparities that she knew existed between Black and white students in the district. And so she was trying to prepare me for systemic racism as a new parent. But let me tell you that there's nothing that can prepare a parent in a lot of these schools in the Pittsburgh Public School District, for systemic racism. So in about 4 years in, a singular incident at Phillips catapulted my advocacy from the local level to the state level. So Phillips had a weekly program called Friday Focus. It was RTII, Response to Instruction and Intervention. And so I took off from work on a Friday to observe my daughter's class after she mentioned a teacher whose name I didn't recognize, Miss Gaither. So on my unannounced visit to Phillips, I found my daughter, my niece, and 13 of their Black classmates playing on the floor. And what the teacher, quote unquote, said, it was self-directed study. But unbeknownst to me, yeah. So check this out. My children, these 15 Black kids, fifth graders, was in reading intervention with a school lunch aid. I had no idea. But when I asked where the other 15 Black kids were, where the other kids were, they were all white. They were in the library reading Just Like Morton, the novel by Ozzie Davis. And they were being taught RTII. They were being taught reading intervention by what was arguably one of the best teachers in a school, Colleen Pilarski. And my daughter was on the floor, and her daughter was in her class. And so,
just for clarity's sake, the lunch aide wasn't trained in reading instruction.
The lunch aide was supposed to pass pizzas out, okay? Yeah. But I
just wanted to be clear, the issue wasn't her being a lunch aide, because there's dignity in all work. The issue was that
she wasn't a teacher. They assigned the black kids to a lunch aid and the white kids. This is RTII, so this is really important. This is remediation for reading. But the white kids was in the library reading a black novel, and my daughter was on the floor. So here's the thing, okay? The building leader that let all this go on, and I confronted him afterwards. He's just been promoted by Dr. Hamlet to the Chief of School Support Services, the Chief of Student Support Services in Pittsburgh Public Schools. So I have a problem with that because, I got some experience with this man. So, my issue is to my position on the Equity Advisory Panel with Pittsburgh Public for the past 13 years is to watch these kind of movements in the public school system, since we are lacking key positions like a deputy superintendent, and we dismantled the Office of Transformation that was supposed to address some of these things. It's important that parents understand what's going on in school governance. If you look at a Pittsburgh Public School organizational chart, parents in the community are at the top, and then the board of directors, and then the superintendent. So we need to help parents understand, the parents in the community, what our role is. It's not just theoretical, it should be in practice.
Before we go, and I know there's some people out there, we got 226 people who are participating today, and I know Derek's going to come in a moment and facilitate some of that Q&A, but I do want to get a couple more people, because I want people to know what you're fighting for and specifically what got you here. So who else wants to jump? And it could be in any aspect of your work, whether it's your scholarship, whether it's your active, but I want people to know. Yeah, Medina, you want to jump in? Yeah.
Yeah, so first I just wanted to comment on the rest as justice and really big up, shout out Windafire and Annika Rains and Christina Springer's work. I've participated in the Black Dream Escape that they set up, and it really helped solidify for me just how much rest is all right. It's what we deserve. And particularly with Black women and femmes, historically, we have been the mules of the world. We have been experimented on. Our bodies have been used for labor and reproduction to serve capitalist interests, right? All these things have happened to us, and we've been holding everybody up all throughout this time. So for me, for us to access our liberation, we have to get in touch with our rest. We have to get in touch with our generational trauma and our generational resilience. And we have to get in touch with our pleasure, our love, and our joy. We deserve that. So in terms of how I was inspired to get into activism, I don't really consider myself to be an activist currently today. That's not what I call myself, though that's what some people refer to me as, but I more so consider myself a social connector, community educator, creative space maker, mama, writer, artist. I consider myself to be those things. And so what prompted me was where I grew up, my family, and my educational experiences. So I come from the Bay Area, South Berkeley, California. If nobody knows where Berkeley is, it's right next to Oakland. I live a couple blocks away from Oakland. And growing up in the Bay, activism was in the soil. Of course, it's the home of the Panthers. So it was all around me. I grew up with a variety of intersections of Black people coming together for a common cause. No matter what intersection of Blackness you occupied, we were able to come together for a common cause. We were able to come together for cultural events and for movement work. So in terms of my family, I wasn't taught activism, but my grandfather was a civil rights activist and poet. My grandmother was a union organizer. My father was an early childhood educator and protested racism in the South. He's from Plaquemine, Louisiana. My aunt was an educator who used her mom's ID to see my mom's ID to see Huey P. Newton in prison. And then my mom, she's like an around the way girl from West Oakland and Richmond, California, who always advocated for herself and always advocated for the people that she knew and she loved. So that's the family influence.
You ain't had no choice then.
Hey, yo, it's in the blood, it was just all around me, And then lastly, I talked about my empowering experience at Berkeley High, but also an aspect of what fuels my work today, particularly around racial and cultural identity, was traumatic experiences that that I had. In junior high school, those I would say were the worst educational experiences of my life because I was teased incessantly every single day, unfortunately, by other Black children who had internalized racial oppression, internalized racial inferiority, and internalized anti-Blackness. So someone with my features, with this broad nose, was not considered beautiful based on all the messaging that society tells us, right? So that trauma and pain fuels my experiences for working in personally, from working in racial identity work today. And my experience at Berkeley High helped give me a voice and helped give me a center and space to really grow and exercise some leadership and learn about myself and learn about our culture and learn about our identity. So I've always been drawn to work in education with youth and with families, or with youth and families in mind. And I couldn't really get it. I was like, why do you keep always gravitating towards education? Why? But I think part of it, aside from the obvious inequities and injustices that are within the educational system, was also that I was empowered in an educational space. I found my voice and my activism in an educational space. So I know that it's possible.
Absolutely. Derek, I know I may steal an extra couple minutes, and we just, if y'all don't mind, but I wanted to make sure I get everybody in on this. Amber, Brittany, I want to jump in, and Laura, of course.
I was just going to say really quickly, because I heard it from both Medina and Brittany when she introduced herself. I grew up in Pittsburgh, though I only moved back whenever I started working at Pitt. But I very much grew up on picket lines. So the sort of justice that I learned was very much through the organized labor movement in Pittsburgh. And I think for me, I really fully expected to go into union organizing. That's what I thought I was going to do. That's what my background was in. And when I started teaching, for me, I saw the intersection of that, because I learned so much more, both from the young people that I worked with, but also from having to learn to be able to teach them. So I was a wonderful teacher in terms of building relationships. In terms of content, I look back on some of the things that I did, and I can't believe in some ways that I was allowed in a classroom, but I loved my students, they loved me, and there was a lot that we did to sort of push forward. So there was a lot of joy in my classroom, but in terms of whether or not they were going to be passing any statewide tests, I can't say. But for me, then I think when I went to graduate school with this idea of how can we change education systems, how can we think about it, I had the opportunity, I think, to work with an amazing cohort of almost entirely women of color. And that really shaped the way I started to think about my work and my work as a potential vehicle. I am a mom, I do that kind of work, and I see those things as really centered together on thinking about what it means to decenter whiteness as we think about education, but also as we think about all the things everybody's been talking about today in terms of what are those expected caregiving practices. I think Medina captured it beautifully when she was talking about, every aspect of our caregiving and of our parenting is educating, but that's not what schools consider to be engagement or involvement. They see it as coming to meetings or donating money or participating in a particular way. And so when I realized that there was a way for scholarship and practice to sort of merge in that way, in both the work that I do, the writing that I do, but also in training future teachers and future superintendents and thinking about the folks that are going to be inhabiting the spaces that we're having to fight so hard in, that to me is really what brought me to my work.
Makes sense to me. Yeah, Brittany.
I'm sorry, are you talking to me?
Yeah, if you want to jump in.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. In regards to your question of how did I get into activism, I'm not going to lie, it mostly feels like the incentive for me is self-preservation, first and foremost. I grew up in a predominantly Black neighborhood in Lincoln and Leamington here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in these streets. And my activism was initially kind of spurred onto me through my grandmother. She was an advocate, an organizer through civil rights, was an individual that worked on multiple policy and political campaigns out in Georgia, and then also ran soup kitchens. Just a people person, somebody that was a community advocate always. So those are the giant shoulders that I stand on. But then also having my father be an ATU member, a member of the Amalgamated Transit Union, not crossing picket lines for the UFCW whenever Giant Eagle here in Pittsburgh, it's a local chain, was going on strike, et cetera, et cetera. These are things that are really formed, to Lori's point, in regards to union organizing and labor surrounding Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, because we are so blue collar heavy. Labor informs us in a lot of ways because we recognize that it's one of the only socioeconomic vessels for Black individuals or other BIPOC people to actually get out of poverty, not pull themselves. They shouldn't have to pull themselves, but to actually get out of poverty. And one of the areas that we recognize is that Black folk in the city should be playing a much larger role in labor. Our jobs or where we are employed sometimes gets ignored by labor. And that prompted me to be angry. Frankly, like a lot of things for me are visceral. Like I just get mad. I'm mad by the way that our plights are ignored. I get angry by the way we are infantilized. I get mad about the pedantry that is routinely thrust in our direction. I get mad at how Black folks are looked at as though they can't handle money, which is how the Section 8 voucher program even came into being, surrounding, housing authorities and low-income housing. I thank Yanga Yamada Tater for that every day for talking about that, because she really amplified the fact that a lot of our issues, even for individuals that think they have best intentions for us or helping us, come out of them not trusting us. And even to what Tarana Burke always said about, survivors knowing what they need, how victims know what their needs are, how other individuals really should be resourcing us and supporting us and giving us the things that are vital to our own liberation, and how folks ignore that. They just don't want to do that. They do not want to do that. They do not want to give us the funds to do that. They do not want to step out of the way to do that. And while I recognize that I got into all of this for my own self-preservation, I also recognize that a lot of these institutions or these nonprofits or even these foundations, they sometimes don't step out of the way because they're in it for self-preservation too. You can't liberate people out of your own job. Like that's not going to really work, is it? So, right. Even with us being on here, I really appreciate, having this platform to have these discussions, especially surrounding education. It is very near and dear to my heart because without having specific educators in my life, Medina kind of touched on this too, surrounding colorism and, anti-Blackness and all these other things that exist, even within our own communities. These were things that I grew up around too. I'm a 6 foot tall, dark-skinned Black woman. Like the bullying was going to happen. Like there was just no escaping that. But I had these incredible specific educators in my life that really propelled me and really gave me the tools and to a certain degree the confidence to be able to think critically on a myriad of issues. So I'm thankful for them. But then what makes me angry is thinking about if I didn't have them. So listen, to wake up Black every day in America is to wake up in a state of rage. I know that is a big part of why I do the things that I do or why I speak up on the issues that I do, right. That's just where I'm at with it.
I'm glad you said that and reminded us of that, because again, I think there's a way that we can frame anger or rage as irrational, as uncivilized, as improper. And so you end up somehow normalizing this idea that you're going to be oppressed and just fine with it, right?
Nope.
We're angry for a reason, but also your anger is it's righteous anger, but it informs the work that you do, right? You're not just angry on the couch, although if you were, I'd understand, but you're working and you're engaged in the world because you're frustrated, you're outraged about the ways that injustice continues to prevail in so many areas of our lives. Angel, please jump on in.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say that in my mind, like everybody needs to be in this work, from artists to activists. I classify as an organizer. To me, the difference between activism and organizing is like, we can have a platform and talk about the issues, but if we roll down a city council as one person, as an activist, we're not going to be able to demand change in that room. Like, we need to organize our people. We need to educate our people. We need our people to feel confident, to have the voice, to step up and challenge systems of power, right? If we're going to have liberation in our communities, if we're going to have resources, and we're going to have police-free schools, and we're going to have community schools, like, we need to organize our people to actually not sit on the couch, right? And to stand up and to fight for the things that we need. The other thing that I will say, we need our people to run for office. You don't have to convince people that are fighting for everything how to vote the right way, right? So now we get people in office that don't look like us, that don't have the same experience as us, haven't been directly impacted by injustice and horrible systems of racism, like Brittany, Medina, Maria, Amber. I'm calling you out. Like, our people need to run for office. Because the thing about it is, when we get people in office, we have to try and beg them to do the right thing, but we already know what the right thing is.
Right. I'll vote for y'all, just for the record. I don't know if that matters.
We need yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I just want to say, like, when I say Black radical, I use that to, like, for my consulting, so folks know what they're getting into. But I identify more as a designer. I've always been the person to say what nobody wants to hear. I don't have time for this anymore. I can go through my whole list of experiences and the people I've had to speak up for and the things that I've had to say, and just thinking about dealing with the bullshit in Pittsburgh and nonprofit and this whole system and structural racism that exists in this city. We can no longer sit here and have these conversations about education and not go back to the gender equity report of how Black women in this city are treated. And I'm not running for office. I'm not entertaining the BS that happens in Pittsburgh. I'm not entertaining politicians, because guess what? At the end of the day, I'm going to get what I want because I'm going to design it and I'm going to force you into this. I don't have time for it anymore. This is not up for option. There's no consensus building around Black lives. Policy is not going to change. We have politics. We have a whole bunch of, the whole entire legal industry has policy and laws around discrimination. And look at it. It's still predominantly white. It doesn't matter. We can spend all day on policy. We can spend all day talking about what kind of legal rights we can have or don't have. But at the end of the day, it's not going to change. It hasn't changed. And we need to figure out other ways to design and empower ourselves and empower our communities.
I disagree.
That's fine.
If we don't fight for it, if we don't put our people in those positions to make those decisions,
I fought for Devin and Pam Harbin, and guess what? Nothing changed at all. Pam and Devin got up on that school board and did nothing. All of them are doing nothing. Kevin Carter, all of them are entertaining this and acting like they are trying so hard and working so hard, and they are doing nothing but perpetuating and maintaining this bullshit school district, along with Hamlet and any other person that entertains it. Again, it is July 9th, and my daughter's IEP has not been implemented since March 16th. I don't have time for this. I'm not running for school board to entertain these people who have done nothing but use our people to sit up on that platform. That is what is happening, and I'm done.
So it raises a really interesting philosophical.
I'm open to that conversation. I don't want to go into a back and forth, but I disagree. I think that we do have strong leadership on the school board, which is in Devin and Pam, and they're very new school board members, and they're not going to overnight change a system of 2,500 students and 30,000 school staff. So I'm open to that dialogue, but I'm not going to be on a platform where we're calling them out for not actively working hard to change a very hard thing.
So I think I was going to say two things. One, obviously, that sounds like a really cool conversation to have. When there's time to flesh that out. I don't know Devin or Pam, so I can't take a position on it. But what I would say is, it raises a couple of philosophical questions about what we want to do as parents and what the possibilities for parent engagement are, right? Everyone on here agrees that there's something wrong with the way we do school right now. And the questions are, is it possible to make a shift? And then, and after I say this, Maria, I want you to jump on in. Is it possible to sort of make shifts in how we work by changing the fundamental structure, right? Do we tear this down and rebuild it, right? I mean, as someone who comes out of a prison abolitionist tradition, I have this conversation every day, right? Do we try ways to reform prison? Do we try to make prisons better? Do we try to make them safer? Or do we tear it down and say the prison as it's currently constructed, that the prison itself is unsustainable for justice? And this becomes a philosophical question, right? And similarly with schools and school boards and such, the question is it even if Devin and Pam are terrible, let's take one extreme, right?
Devin and Pam are not terrible. We're not.
No, I know.
Usually, if you want to say Terry Kennedy and Cindy Fox, go with those two.
Let's make hold on. Let's make up some new names. Let's say John and Jim.
Don't come for my people now. Don't come
Let's
for my
just say
people.
the whole school board, the
not.
entire school board is trash.
Okay.
Period.
Okay. Let's use a different example, because I don't want this to be about those people. I'm making it a slightly different argument. Let's say here in Philadelphia, there are two people here named John and Jim, and they're on the school board. We just put them on the school board, and they're down with us. So one way to think about this is if we can get more John and Jims on there, and we can get the place to be, and I got you, Maria. That if there are more John and Jims, we can build up the board, and eventually there'll be all John and Jims, and then they can change the system for us. Another way to think about it is that the system itself shapes the people who are on it. And so no matter who John and Jim are, no matter how good John and Jim are, even if John and Jim are sincere and principled, as long as the board exists as it does and the system exists as it does, it's going to constrain possibility, and they can never be who we want them to be because the system doesn't allow it. Then there's the possibility that John and Jim are the wrong people, that John and Jim are the worst people ever, and that if we could just get better John and Jims, then we'd be fine. And so then that doesn't become a question about the system, that becomes a question about these people. And then the last piece that I want to just add really quickly is it's also possible that some of these things are simultaneously true, right? That we could find better John and Jims, and that being on that school board does matter, because if John and Jim weren't there, then Pete and Ron would be on there, and you know how trash they were, right? So we can at least get some relief in the short term, but that our whole story can't be a story of getting more of these people. I'm forgetting the names now, but that we can build this thing as we fly, right? That we can hold off and keep at arm's length some of the worst things that are happening to our children by getting more people on who will resist, at the same time that we recognize that the system itself is not broken, right? But rather that it is doing exactly what it's designed to do, which is to reproduce inequality, to reinforce white supremacy, to expand the gaps between those who have and those who don't have, to ignore trans folk, to ignore disabled folk or other able folk, to do all of these things. And then that becomes a different kind of conversation. And I think part of what makes what we're doing here, and I'm gonna give Maria the last word before we go to Derek. Part of what we're doing here this month with CUESEF is to help us think through these things and to say there are no simple answers, right? There are no one-size-fits-all solutions and models, but rather the complexity of this issue is that we do have to do a whole bunch of stuff at the same time. We got to work, resist, struggle, pray, heal, sleep, fight, cry, all at the same time in order to get anything close to justice for our babies. Maria, I'm gonna give you the last word.
So, I just want to acknowledge that Angel, who I know as a strong organizer, and Amber as a strong mother and advocate, you guys both have good points. And we all should get together, because after Marc leaves, we need to have a talk. So this is good to do. So let me just say that one thing, Marc, I realized I'm a school monitor in Philadelphia. You guys got a strong leader in Dr. Height up there. Those people love him. And Jenna Monley and all the people up there in the 404 building, they are doing a great work in parent engagement. So here's the thing, and I'm probably going to get kicked off of the Equity Advisory Panel for saying this, because I came out publicly against Dr. Hamlet, but he needs to go. He's not doing the right thing. We have to hold weak leaders accountable, and we cannot continue the way we are with the superintendent that's a poor communicator. He's the most elusive superintendent that's been around, and Angel and I have worked together. So I that's my opinion. You cannot restructure this district and make school reform with the skeleton crew that we have with the chief. And I love Monica Jenkins, but she's on a learning curve in Pittsburgh. They did not implement ESSA, the Every Student Succeed Act, would have been a training for parents to help us understand school governance, to talk about standardized testing. I mean, we went to Harrisburg. I traveled with Angel, so I've been working with Angel for a long time. We traveled to different conferences and stuff, but when it's all about the implementation. So there are solutions, but we have to hold leaders accountable who try to create theories of actions that we're not involved in. It's ridiculous. And so, it's not about us arguing. That's what happens, Angel and Amber, because we're all passionate. People have asked me, like, Maria, why don't you run for office? Why don't you run for the school board? When I watch those 3-hour meetings, who has that kind of time? So I applaud everybody.
It's an unpaid position.
Yeah, but let me say this, okay? Since y'all talk about people, you know what? I have a big problem with Sylvia Wilson as the president of the school board. You have the great council of city schools who Dr. Hamlet engaged to do progress monitoring, and him and Sylvia Wilson are on the board of the Council for Great City Schools. Like, how does that work? I have a degree in accounting. I was an auditor for 13 years. That's not an arm's length thing. That is like collusion. That can't happen. So we really should. Let me say this, and I'm gonna wrap it up. Here's what we should do, okay? Because Dr. Hamlet is bragging about what's in his strategic plan. Expect great things. We should have a town hall meeting and make him. Don't let him hide behind Erica Fairby-Jones and all those women that are smarter than him. Make him answer the questions, okay? It's his strategic plan. Y'all know what I'm talking about. We've been in Pittsburgh for a long time. We need to make Dr. Hamlet, I'm saying this to you, Dr. Hamlet, because I sent you an email and you ain't called me. I babysat Erica Fairby-Jones. Erica, you won't call me. I carried you on my back to preschool. So you need to call me, girl, so we can have a talk. Because your kids were in the system too. You're the chief of staff. Y'all need to quit hiding, because these kids around here see this. This is one of those pamphlets, okay? This is one of those pamphlets that my neighbor didn't do. She's in the 5th grade, and guess what? Her picture is on. See this child? This is my next door neighbor. They stuck her picture on track to equity. She's a student at Martin Luther King, and she's not on track to equity. That's educational malfeasance. So, Dr. Dancy, I thank you for having us, since I have the last word. But Angel and Amber and Medina, who I work with on the top advisory board, and Lori and Brittany, nice to meet you. And Windafire, Derek, thank you. But we all need to get together after this.
Oh yeah, I want y'all to get together. But we ain't. Oh, just to be clear, we ain't leaving. We're gonna take a couple questions real quick.
Yeah, I'm just saying, after you leave, after you go back to Philadelphia, these sisters that we never wrote, we gonna have a powwow. We gonna put on our masks.
Let's do it. Like, I'll talk to anybody. Let's do it.
All right, let's make it happen. Derek, jump on.
They love when we fight each other. So
that's what it's about.
Good afternoon, everybody. I want to keep the same energy, but I also want to just shift us just slightly. We've got lots of questions that have come in, and I really want to say I'm thinking about them as a silver lining, because some of the questions have come from parents, some of the questions have come from administrators, and we've got questions from teachers. And so what you all have, and we have some school board administrators and school board members who are right now on the call. And so
hopefully Devin and Pam are on here.
So what you're saying is getting heard, and what you're saying is being heard. So I think for me, that's the silver lining. Each of you has been ushered to this spot. Whatever your activism is motivated by, you've been ushered in by a series of joy, pain, sorrow, struggle, triumph, success, and failure. So all of us kind of got to this kind of point of confluence, and we're at this point together. And one of the things I want to respond to, one of the things that was said, somebody asked, well, it's easy to focus on the problem. What about what can be done? But I want to say to that person or persons who feel this way, you've got to learn to stomach the stories of the people. You've got to learn to hear the pains and passions of the people, because if you don't, you are missing a critical piece in the solution. And so to the persons who asked that question, wanting us to move beyond the problems, you've got to learn to stomach those, because those are at the core of the solutions. And people are not just speaking about problems, they are living these problems. And you can hear this in the passion of each of the panelists. We're living these moments. These aren't abstract things. These aren't things that are just in the context. These are what constructs us. And so I want you to learn to kind of get a stomach for that. And what I want to do is I want to ask each of you, because most of the questions are centering around what's next. There are questions that ask, if we are to burn it down, or if we are to remove it, what comes in its place? That's one thing to think about. Another thing to think about is, what's the distinction between words like engagement, involvement, or just a mere invitation for just presence? And how do we usher schools and community members to move beyond presence, but being present and accounted for? And when you're accounting for us, you're accounting for the history that we bring to the table, accounting for the hurt and the hope that we bring to the table. So think about that. And teachers are asking those who are listening, saying, what can they do right now? What can they do tomorrow? And what can they do post-COVID? So those are kind of three things. Imagine about engagement versus mere presence. Imagine what it means for teachers tomorrow and beyond COVID. And imagine if we are to remove it. Because one person said that PPS doesn't have a funding issue, it has a funding priority issue. Particularly if you think about, given the context of the other school systems in Allegheny County, that it's a funding priority issue. So think about funding priorities. Think about what is going to replace what we burn down, and who's going to be around for the building, and what does that look like? And think about how we move from mere invitation to actual engagement that reflects our actual lived experiences. So we'll start. I see Medina coming in with the first raised hand, so please jump in with those in response to any of those.
Okay, so in terms of some solutions, right? So I think in terms of COVID, some are emerging as we go. By parents having to facilitate their child's learning. Some are able and more interested in homeschooling. That's not possible for everybody, but there are some. So they saw something positive in that experience and learned that their children enjoy learning from them. So that is one solution that parents are taking and caregivers are taking upon themselves. Next, I think this is an opportunity to somewhat start from scratch if we perceive the current space that way and focus on what do our children really need to thrive. I kind of vacillate between reform, equity, justice, and abolition. So my thoughts kind of go in those waves. So it's both and versus either or to me. But on an abolitionist teaching panel, a sister named Goldie Muhammad, author of Cultivating Genius, get that book. I'm gonna get that book. She said that our children need 4 things. They need skills, but currently we have an over-reliance on skills. But they need skills, criticality, intellectual development, and identity development. And assessments for how our children are doing shouldn't be dependent on Eurocentric standards, pedagogical models, and behaviors that are based in Eurocentrism, right? They need to be based on our standards. What are our standards? What are our student standards for themselves? What are our standards as parents and caregivers? And then what are community-led standards and informed standards, right? And also there's a need to incorporate the brilliance of Black educational scholars and practitioners, right? Who before the integration of schools were teaching our children, right? So though oftentimes in subpar conditions. And I really want to echo that. We need to start with educational excellence and the brilliance of our scholars, educators, homeschoolers, and parents and caregivers. I also think that we have to stop pathologizing our children or holding their standard of education to what white children do because because white children in this country aren't being educated well either. Right. So that's another thing. I know we need to do those comparisons for equity's sake, but we already know that these school systems were not created for our children. So they're just surviving in a system that was not created for them. Right. But I think the harms of whiteness and raising and educating white children within white supremacist, racist structures need to be a significant area of focus because they are growing up with internalized racial superiority and continuously perpetuating and recreating systems of racial oppression, right? So study the impact of white culture infiltrated and as a part of white schooling, right? And then, of course, certain things like bringing back arts education. And in terms of website, check out racepride.pitt.edu. There are some tangible strategies there, but I also want to recommend 2 books, right? I want to recommend the book Transformative Schooling, Towards Racial Equity in Education by Dr. Vajra Watson. We happen to go to high school together, and she's over at UC Davis, and we did that organizing together. This book focuses on Chris Chapman's work on the African American Male Achievement Office in Oakland Public Schools, where the target areas and things that they looked at that were solution-oriented were policy advocacy, hiring and training Black teachers, parent engagement, narrative change, building self-esteem through cultural identity and racial identity, mentoring, out of classroom experiences, and opportunities to lead and advocate. So get that book, as well as her book, Learning to Liberate, where you can gather lessons from successful community educators, because the school is one place, education is happening all around us, and we can learn from folks who work with youth, and we can learn from teaching artists, we can learn from out of school time folks, and how to better engage and educate youth. So that's kind of from reform and tweaking to equity and justice to abolition. That's kind of my purview of some potential solutions. And if parents are looking to get involved with some work, you know, there's the Equity Advisory Panel definitely needs to be more supported. There's also the Council for Cultural Equity and Emancipated Education as well. They're fighting for our children, and Black Women for a Better Education are also fighting for a better education for our kids.
I want to ask this question earlier, and I'd like for Windafire and for Amber to think about this. Earlier, Windafire said that we need to go to the learner. And I think that's very simple, and I think that's very powerful at the same time. Go to the learner. For oftentimes, parents and caregivers are asked to move toward this center called schooling rather than the other way around. And so, Amber, could you think about, for me, and also like Windafire to think about this, could you articulate for us, what would it mean if you were to be speaking to a school board member or some administrator? What would it mean for them to come to you through the lens of your learner? What would it mean for them to come to you versus you having to ask and pursue and to seek? What would it look like the other way around?
So for a short period of time, I was in Philadelphia, and I was in I can't think of the school district. It begins with an M. Kobe Bryant went to school there.
Lower Marion?
Lower Marion, thank you. Lower Marion School District. I put in an application. I needed to be in a public school. I live in a main line. And Lower Marion's application regarding special education is very personal. They're engaging me. We need this. We need this. What do you need? Where's your IEP? What are your supports? What's the SDIs? Not me saying, I went to this school. I toured 6 schools like I did. I researched all types of curriculum like I did. I brought my own professionals in on our IEP teams like I did. Them coming to me looks like them telling me ahead of time, like all the other resources I have, because I am going to speak from the privilege that I have a ton of resources and I'm still not getting anywhere with my child. So I bring resources to the district. What I need is the district to center the most marginalized and build out from there. That is how you design a school district that works for the community. The community, the folks that the school didn't work for, should be at that table. The adults that went through your special education programs should be there. The Black families that are hungry should be there. Not to ask how you want us to reopen a school, because we shouldn't be reopening the school, but how are we doing a good job?
When you say we shouldn't reopen it at all, or
my daughter has epilepsy. Once again, we're not talking about the most marginalized. There are medically fragile children in these schools. My daughter's threshold to withstand a virus, the common cold, puts her in a whole entire grandma seizure. So we're not even thinking about those children.
Gotcha.
Period.
Okay, I apologize.
Yeah, sorry. I apologize for being, but I'm gonna be really honest.
Yeah,
I'm triggered, and this to me is what I feel like having to explain to adults that claim that they're professionals and they've been in workspaces and have seen the type of we are creating that environment in our schools. We should be going to our communities, and we should be asking our communities, and we should be not placating and just bringing them to the table and acting like the information we just gathered is now going to be useful, because it's not. Them coming to me is saying, hey, Amber, we recognize that these scores look like X, Y, and Z. Your daughter's not reading at this level, and here are recommendations. That is a school district. That is a school district that actually pays attention to their children's IEPs. That is a school district that actually knows how to collect and analyze the data. That is a school district that is trying to create or trying to support children while they're in that school. Not me bringing everything to them. Not me having to scream and beat on their marching and organize my entire family to do drop-ins for a whole day and pick it outside the school. That's not the school district I want. That is not how we design something, and that's not how we center children. That is it.
I want to make sure. So I want to do two things. I want to ask Windafire a specific question. What at home should we find in our public schools? And I'd also like to know, because many of you have really built a bridge between parent and caregiver and also activist. I want to ask Angel to talk to us about her transition from parent to activist and being politically savvy, and how the work, or what she sees as the next step in the work. So I want to hear from Windafire, and then I'd like to hear from Angel. I know we're about to close up time.
So wait, what was the question for me again?
So thinking about what's the best from home, or some of the practices in your home education experience that we should have in K-12 public schools. What should we be seeing there?
Well, as I said, I feel like we should go to the learner. And what I mean by that is I feel like we should kind of abandon how we think of curriculums as it is. I feel like we should ask kids what they want to do, and then provide them the necessary tools on how to do that. You know, I want to professionally play tennis, you know, giving them the tools to, you know, physically be able to do that, but then also, you know how to do that just mentally, you know the physics that goes into tennis and how that works, so that they can be the best tennis player that they can be. And so that's something that I definitely think that we should implement into public schooling systems.
Thank you. More student-driven curriculum design. Angel, will you kind of close us out and share with us your thoughts about what the next state of the work would be?
Yeah, I mean, we want to continue to create platforms where parents can get educated. I mean, we have very specific campaigns that we've been working on for many, many years. We do want to reimagine what our schools look like. We do want to have full, sustainable community schools where we have culturally relevant curriculum, where we have tons and tons of services, where we have kids with disabilities that are actually getting the services that they need. 100%. And the only way that we think that you do that is through policy and actually having a democratically elected school board. Because I'll tell you right now, in other cities that are taken by the state, you can picket in front of your school, you can testify at those hearings, and not one thing changes. So I'm grateful that we still have a process to elect and unelect school board members. I will continue to do that work. Primary 2021. We're demanding to eliminate 20 school police officers. We don't have, I appreciate the leadership of Devin, Kevin, and Pam on, bringing this conversation to the table about how we reimagine public safety in our schools. So, but that's not enough votes, right? So I'm looking forward to, having a school board that the community selects, but we don't have to beg and plead to get the services we need for our children.
I appreciate that. I really appreciate all of our panelists. Let's give a round of applause to each other. I want to all of those who have attended, not only the party, but the after party. Thank you for sticking with us. I'm looking forward to the ongoing conversation, the ongoing activism, the ongoing engagement from not only the panelists, but the people who are in your spheres of influence. I want to thank Dr. Marc Lamont Hill for always leading us in these discussions and having such a rich way of bringing his scholarship to us in ways that continue to inform, instruct, and also inspire. And thank each of you for being here. Dr. Hill, if you want to close us out, I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, first of all, I want to thank everybody for this great conversation. Angel, Windafire, Maria, Lori, Medina, Brittany, Amber. It's been a great conversation, and the best conversations are ones that keep going afterward. And I'm sure y'all going to be talking afterward about all kinds of stuff. But I think those of us who participated, this week in the conversation, I think watching you all in particular, I've learned a great deal and understanding just what it means to be a caregiver, just what it means to be a parent in this moment of crisis. And it means lots of things, and there's no easy solutions, but we're going to continue every day, every week to work toward a goal of justice. But the key is to keep pushing, to keep fighting, to keep resisting. Windafire has, I'm sorry, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen. Is that a chicken?
Yeah, this is Benito. He went missing, but we just recently found him. So here he is.
That makes me happy.
Here to join us.
That's the kind of joy we need every day. That made my whole day better. Anyway, family, I love y'all and thank you. Remember, we're back here next week at the same time, 2:00. A different conversation with a different group of folk, and every week we'll be talking to different folk, from policymakers to leaders of schools to community members to teachers and students, and it's all part of the same question of how do we build community, how do we expand, educate, enhance the public good. I want to thank you all for watching. I want to thank you all for joining me, and we'll see you next week. Bye.